Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Her Three Best Friends by Molly Eden. Narrated by Marie Hawkins and Stephen Borne. Chapter 1. Olivia. Usually the gym where I worked was my happy place. I loved being able to teach and work out at the same time, and seeing my regular students hit their goals was truly satisfying. But today I just wanted to be back in bed, dead to the world. It was supposed to be my day off, and I had so many plans. I was going to go to the farmer's market, work on my business plan for my vegan protein powder company I dreamed of creating, and just take a break from teaching spin and yoga 5 days a week. I'd been pushing myself lately. As much as I loved being active, I needed breaks too. But my friend and coworker Gracie was sick, so I was filling in for her private yoga class. She'd do the same for me in a heartbeat. Ugh. I just wish this had happened on a day when I didn't need just a few more hours of sleep. Whatever, it was just a session. I'd be able to go back home before I knew it. I went into one of the small private yoga rooms that Gracie had prepared for my student. Gracie had mentioned that the student was a bit of a snob, but I was used to that. Most of my students were great, but every once in a while I had to deal with one who fit every stereotype of a wealthy, bitchy woman. I wasn't thrilled, but it was either taking over for my coworker or the gym getting some awful review because her lesson had to be rescheduled. Word of mouth was a big deal, especially in South Beach. I laid out 2 mats and a few blocks, then started on my own warm-up. I discovered yoga when I was a teenager, totally by accident. Someone taught a one-off class in the park where I used to hang out with my best friends Noah, Jacob, and Austin. I took the class, fell in love, and got a receptionist job at the studio where the teacher was from. Now, here I was all these years later. By the time I finished loosening up, I had 1 minute before our session started. Too bad the student wasn't as punctual. I waited and waited, until finally, she strolled in 15 minutes late, looking at her phone and barely acknowledging me. She looked exactly like I thought she would. Not a hair out of place, decked out in expensive athleisure. She looked super fit, but that didn't translate to how she was moving. Everything she did was at half speed, from her sauntering in to her toeing off her shoes. "Hi, I'm Olivia," I said after an uncomfortable pause. "I'm filling in for Gracie. You must be Blair?" "Oh, hi, yeah." She looked up from her phone for a moment before tucking it back into her purse. She handled it like it was made of glass, once again sucking away precious seconds of my life. "Yoga." "Yep." I slapped on a smile as much as I wanted to roll my eyes. I walked Blair through a few warm-up poses, then got to the series that Gracie had outlined for me to teach. Blair had clearly been practicing for a while. In most circumstances, I would have been excited to see someone pushing themselves. But Blair was dragging me down. Did she want to be here or not? Every single pose came with a sigh or a look that said, "Ugh, seriously?" Finally, we finished with child's pose. "So that's everything for today," I said, standing up. "Gracie will be back for you next session." "Okay." Blair grabbed her purse and phone and left without another word or look. Lovely. I wasn't expecting her to go from child's pose to bowing and thanking me profusely. But even looking at me or acknowledging me on her way out would have been nice, considering how late she was. I let out a long breath and started cleaning up. I had to report back to Gracie. Then I could get back to my day off. I didn't need for this woman to throw me off for another second. I hadn't taken a rest in the sauna in a long time, so I wanted to do that before I left. I was excited to rest, period. My boyfriend Clark and I had a trip to the Caribbean coming up, so we'd have plenty of time to escape and decompress together. He'd been so busy lately, and he needed the break too. He worked for his dad's law firm, but he didn't get much special treatment. He was expected to put in all the hours like everyone else did. Well, most of the time. Once I texted Gracie about how the session had gone, I went into the women's locker room to change into a towel. Hopefully, I'd have the room to myself. It was the middle of the day, so not many people were around. I tucked my towel around myself tighter and put my hair up in a messy bun before stepping inside. I opened the door, closing my eyes against the damp heat. It seeped into my bones, loosening up the knots that yoga didn't quite hit. When I opened my eyes, I wish I hadn't. 2 people were inside, a man sitting on a towel and a woman straddling him. They were right in the middle of the bench. The woman, Blair, bouncing up and down on the man's cock. My man's cock. Clark's eyes were squeezed shut, his grip tight on Blair's hips. I stood there, staring in horror as much as I didn't want to accept or see what was in front of me. Between the heat and the way my heart rate had sped up, I was close to fainting. My brain just stopped working for a few moments. "Clark?" I finally managed to say, bracing myself up with a hand on the doorframe. My legs felt weak. Finally, they realized I existed. Clark's blue eyes widened, and he practically pushed Blair off his lap. He tried to cover himself, as if that would have helped, his mouth opening and closing. Nothing coherent came out. "What the fuck are you doing?" I yelled, finding my voice again. "What are you even doing here? This is your day off," he shot back, as if that even mattered. Some other woman was riding him seconds ago. He didn't have the right to ask me anything right now. "What am I doing here? What are you doing fucking her? What are you doing here, period? Aren't you supposed to be at the office?" I asked, my chest heaving. The humidity in the air was choking me, and I needed Clark out of my sight immediately, before I did something stupid. "You know what? I don't need to know." I pushed away and let the door slam shut, tears spilling from my eyes. The ache of being someone's second choice, of people seeing me as dead weight, was familiar and unwelcome. The whole situation was terrible, but what really twisted the knife was that they'd both seemed to be enjoying it. I couldn't say the same every time we had sex. Our sex life was fairly normal. Well, it was slightly boring, if I were being honest. Clark wasn't great at taking my directions and never had the intuition to find the positions that made my toes curl in ecstasy. No wonder he never put much thought or effort into our sex life. He was getting what he wanted from someone else. Was Blair the first, or was she one of many? I didn't know. I just wanted to escape. Chapter 2. Olivia. I threw on my clothes and left, barely managing to hold my sobs back as I rushed through the gym to my car. And when I got to my car, I sobbed, full-on ugly crying to the point where I wasn't sure if I could drive. I rested my hands on my knees and did some deep belly breaths. Clark hadn't followed me outside, but I didn't want to stick around and see if he was on his way out. My breathing centered me, and I pulled away, continuing my steady breathing all the way back home. Driving over the bridge to Star Island only made my tears start up again. I was almost home, almost able to let go and cry in bed. I lived with Austin, Noah, and Jacob in a sprawling mansion. I couldn't have afforded a closet in this location if I had to pay the market rate for rent. They'd made billions with the security firm they'd founded, so the small amount I gave them for rent wasn't even a blip on their radars. Still, I had to pay something. I'd grown up taking care of things myself, and I wasn't going to stop anytime soon. I pulled into my parking spot, my modest Volkswagen standing out against the row of luxury cars from every company imaginable. The guys never made me feel bad about it, though. If anything, they were always begging to buy me a newer, better car since mine was unsafe. It was absolutely fine. Older, but with character. Sure, the battery and the AC were a bit wonky sometimes, but it ran 99% of the time. Did they think that cars that weren't made in the past 3 years were metal death traps? I rolled my eyes, even in my state. They were my best friends, but sometimes they drove me a little nuts. I was more than capable of taking care of myself. At least they weren't home during the day. They'd freak out if they saw me now. I went into the kitchen to raid the fridge. Our Sub-Zero fridge was huge, so each of us had space for our own food. "Shit," I said, staring at the array of beautiful fresh fruits and vegetables that I had. In any other circumstance, I would have whipped up something with those ingredients. I loved cooking. But now, I just wanted something indulgent that I didn't have to prepare. I checked the freezer and found some chocolate oat milk ice cream. For whatever reason, the ice cream made me start crying again. Was it because it was the middle of the day and I was going to eat this ice cream alone in bed? Or was it just reality hitting me again? I dug straight into the pint right at the counter, tears making the ice cream taste salty. It was probably both. I'd thought Clark was, well, not the one, if such a thing even existed, but I thought he was a good boyfriend on paper. He had a career, and he was nice enough. Nice enough? How had my standards slipped so hard? Then again, it said a lot that Clark was one of my better boyfriends. My exes were so into me at first, then something always happened that made them drift away. Jacob, who always gave me the best advice and wisdom, told me time and time again that it wasn't my fault. But looking back, wasn't I the common denominator in all my bad relationships? The sound of a man arguing reached my ears. It had to be Austin. Noah and Jacob wouldn't have lost their shit on the phone to anyone. Austin stopped in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall when he saw me, his hands still fisted in his short, dark brown hair. He filled the large doorway with his height and broad-muscled shoulders, his colorful tattoos standing out against the light modern decor. His eyes widened, and he sucked in a breath. "Something more important came up," he said into the phone, hanging up. But then he immediately dialed another number, not taking his eyes off of me. "Yeah, come home. Something's wrong with Olivia." He ended the call and finally entered the kitchen, his green eyes stormy with rage. But underneath that was worry. "Who the fuck did this to you? Why are you crying?" He gently gripped my shoulders. "What happened?" The intensity of his eyes made tears spill down my cheeks. "Clark," I sniffed, wiping away my tears and looking away from him. He moved into my line of vision again. "I found him fucking someone else in the sauna." Austin's eyes flared with rage again, even more intense than when he found me. He stepped away from me, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He paced around, seemingly trying to gather himself and not fly off the handle. It took him a while, but eventually he came back to me, his body language calmer, but his eyes as fierce as ever. "Do you want me to take care of Clark?" he asked, his deep voice low. I didn't doubt that he'd wreck Clark without breaking a sweat. Austin was just as strong and vicious as he looked, even if his outside hid a protective heart. "Because I'd do it in a heartbeat." No, it's... I blew out a breath, making the hair that had fallen loose from my bun float up, then down. "Well, it's not fine, but it's the reality, and I can't go back and unsee it." "Just give me the word and I'll do it. Seriously. I've been kicking the asses of all the shitty men in your life since we were, 11? Why would I stop now?" He hadn't kicked all the men's asses, but only because he'd been too small when we were 11. The first time we met, I was crying, just like this. My entire world had flipped upside down months before that day. One day, I was happy and loved with my parents. The next, my parents were dead from an accident, and I was living with my uncle, who my parents hadn't even liked. But he was all I'd had left. That day, my uncle had yelled at me for some minor mistake I'd made. I didn't even remember what it was since all of his angry moments blended together. Somehow that was worse than when he just ignored me, which was how it was the rest of the time. Austin must have spotted me from his house next door and appeared next to me. I didn't know him, but when he put his arm around me, some of the pain inside me disappeared. I felt like I was being noticed, but not for how I'd screwed up. Then he introduced me to Jacob, who lived not far from us, and later Noah, who met them both while playing basketball in the park that lay between the nice side of town and our slightly more run-down area. "I know, always my protector." I gave him a hug. His body was warm, his muscles hard under his thin t-shirt. Even in this mess of a state I was in, I couldn't help but notice how good his body felt. I wanted to explore his body someday, As ridiculous as I knew that was, he was my best friend. As much as I loved him, it could never be like that. We had way too much to lose. Always. He held on to me just a beat longer than I expected him to, his hands lingering on my back. We separated, a flush warming my cheeks. Austin had never outright said anything, but all the little glances and casual touches over the years told me he felt a similar way about me, at least physically. But he had never pushed it, and honestly, he never would. He valued our friendship just as much as I did. Besides, throwing myself into some other relationship, especially one with someone as important as Austin, was the last thing on my mind.
Chapter 3. Noah. Seeing Olivia cry always hurt me, but seeing her this shaken up while Austin looked like he wanted to commit murder was a knife in my chest. Her beautiful blue eyes were puffy and red, and her normally good posture was deflated. Even her bun looked limp, like it had given up. Her light had dimmed. I never wanted her to feel like that. I didn't give a shit if I dipped out of a Zoom meeting early. I just wanted to make her smile again. "Liv, what happened?" I asked, crossing the kitchen in a few steps and resting my hands on her slender shoulders. "Her asshole of a boyfriend cheated on her," Austin said, disgust written all over his face. "She caught them in the sauna." I took a deep breath and let it out through my nose. I wasn't the kind of guy to blow up and rage, but whenever someone messed with Olivia, I always had trouble holding on to my control. Who did Clark think he was, cheating on someone like Olivia? Did he know her at all? Anyone who spent more than a minute around her knew she was the kind of friend you'd want to hang on to for life. Being with her was just easy. Did Clark not see how gorgeous she was? Even in her exhausted state, she was stunning. Her features were soft and feminine, and her body was the perfect mix of fit and lithe. But the way she carried herself made her even more attractive to me, like she walked into every situation with poise and confidence. I guaranteed whoever he was cheating with couldn't compare to Olivia in any sense. No woman did. I'd dated a handful of women in a semi-serious way, but none of them had ever held my attention the way that she could. If I didn't know how Jacob and Austin felt about her, the same way as I did, I would have made a move a long time ago. But I wasn't going to wreck our friendships for my own selfish needs. Olivia wiped her eyes again, sniffing and pressing a hand to her chest as if she was literally holding in a sob. My irritation took over my thoughts again. I hadn't liked Clark before. Everything about him reeked of the kind of pampered, trust fund kids I'd grown up around, the kids I'd turned away from in favor of Jacob, Olivia, and Austin. Sitting around with them at the park was infinitely better than zooming around in someone's dad's Lamborghini. They weren't going to judge me, or anyone else for that matter. Clark did, though. He always had some shit to say about whatever we were doing in the rare instances he hung out with all of us. He hated the actor in the movie, or he'd heard something negative about some musician, or his clients were being assholes for reasons he claimed were unjustified, even though they were very justified. It was fucking exhausting, even for me. Jacob managed to be patient, as always, but Austin just got up and left when he got tired of him. I played nice for Olivia's sake, smiling at the right times. The guy had always felt off, like he wasn't all the way there for her. Part of him was always looking for the next opportunity. I hated that I was right. I pulled Olivia into a hug so she wouldn't see the anger written all over my face. She smelled good, like her lemongrass shampoo, and her body felt so good against mine. She was tall, around 5 feet 9 inches, but I had about 6 inches on her. She was a perfect fit. I pulled back. This wasn't about my dick. She needed me as her friend. "Quit your job," I said, still holding on to her shoulders. I didn't want to stop touching her. "You don't need to be in a place where you'll run into those assholes." Olivia shook her head. "I can't. I need the money." This nonsense again. We'd offered to hire her on at the company as a consultant, but not actually give her anything to do. Then her only worries would have been working on her wellness company and taking care of herself. She didn't need to run herself ragged teaching intense classes and taking on more and more private yoga sessions. I sighed, running my hand through my hair. "We've already made you a partner of the firm, Liv. Just take the paycheck. I know. You've told me 1,000 times. You guys have already done enough." She gestured around the kitchen. "You let me live here almost rent-free. You're amazing friends. It's more than enough. I can't just take your money when I'm capable of making my own." "You shouldn't pay rent at all," Austin grumbled. "I should." Her eyes were fierce. We weren't going to convince her to give in any time soon. Her stubborn streak drove me nuts, but on some level, I liked her backbone. She was sure of her ability to take care of herself, too. She wasn't going to sit around and wait for someone else to fix her problems. "You're killing us, Liv," I said, gently bopping her bun. "Someday we'll wear you down, let you loosen up. A little yoga for that stubborn streak." A teasing lilt in my voice made her smile just a little bit, but it was more than enough. I'd made her feel better than she'd felt before. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The guards at the front gate of the neighborhood were calling. "Yeah, hi," I said, keeping my eyes on Olivia. She had stopped crying to my relief. I turned the phone on speaker. "Hello, Mr. Anderson. We have a guest here to see Ms. Williams. His name is Clark," the guard said. "Fuck no," Austin said. "Send him—" "Wait, no." Olivia put her hand on his arm. "I want him to explain himself." Austin and I exchanged a look right as Jacob came bursting in, breathing hard, as if he'd run a mile at a full sprint to get here. He was almost always nearby at the office, but today was the one day he'd gone out to meet with a cybersecurity consultant. "What happened?" he asked, his voice gentle as he approached Olivia. Jacob was the only one who could keep his cool in the face of Olivia being upset, even though I doubted he was calm on the inside. Olivia took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I'm going to talk to my cheating asshole ex." Chapter 4. Jacob. I had rushed home as fast as possible when Austin told me something was wrong with Olivia, but I was the last one here. At least she hadn't been alone, crying her eyes out. Olivia crying wasn't unheard of, but it was rare enough that when she did, it was almost physically painful to witness. I always trusted Austin and Noah to keep her safe when I wasn't around. But not safe enough. Clark had cheated on her, and she still wanted to talk to him? I wanted to make his life hell. Fighting him was more of Austin's thing, and giving him a tongue-lashing was Noah's, so I'd ruin him behind the scenes. It would be so easy, too. He probably used the same password for every last one of his accounts, something simple. He went to an Ivy League university, but speaking to him for more than 2 seconds showed that his family had to have paid off the admissions department to get him in. I knew those kids well from my time as a scholarship kid at Harvard. I'd graduated almost 10 years ago, but those types still pissed me off. Olivia and Austin had moved to the Boston area with us, even though they weren't in school, and they'd gotten a dose of these types as well. I wondered how Olivia tolerated him. I doubted he'd satisfied Olivia the way she needed. I wasn't going to ask her, of course, but everything about Clark screamed that he never ate pussy, but demanded that he get a blowjob all the time. He was such a piece of shit. I was glad Olivia was free from him, but I wished it hadn't happened like this. I swallowed hard, stuffing my rage down and keeping my expression calm. As good as my revenge would feel, I knew that Olivia wasn't the type to hurt people intentionally. She wouldn't want me to ruin his life, which I could easily do. Planting some malware on his computer was the closest I could get to revenge. What good was it being the chief technology officer of our company if I didn't use my knowledge from time to time? That still wasn't enough, though. I hated not being able to control the situation, to actively steer it in the right direction, to steer it to a place where Olivia felt safe and didn't have to deal with this at all. I pushed down the anger and fear multiplying inside of me. This was Olivia's battle to fight, and I had to stand behind her. "Send him in," Noah said to the guard, who was still on the line, and ended the call. "I can't be within arm's reach of this motherfucker," Austin said, going to the other side of the kitchen island. "I don't trust myself to keep my cool." "We're just going to chat," Olivia told him, holding a hand up. "It's not going to be a huge fight." "We're not leaving." I put my hand on her upper back. "Yeah, of course not," Noah added. "I don't trust him being alone with you." "Just let us talk, okay?" Olivia gave us each a meaningful look. She was capable of handling herself, but it wasn't easy to let her be in harm's way. We unlocked the front door remotely, and Clark came in. "Liv?" he called. "Where are you, baby?" Austin's jaw twitched at the pet name. It left a sour taste in my mouth, too. It sounded so wrong on his lips, so insincere. "I'm in the kitchen." Olivia's voice didn't waver. Clark came around the corner, pausing when he saw me, Noah, and Austin. Clark was in shape, but in terms of raw strength, all three of us would win, and he knew it. Plus, I doubted he'd ever been in a fistfight. Clark tucked his hands into the pockets of his shorts, curling in on himself like he was trying to disappear. His hair was still damp and his cheeks were flushed. Had he stopped to take a shower before coming here? He should have gotten in his car and rushed over to her if he was really sorry. An apology wasn't enough, though. How was Olivia strong enough to stand here when he'd betrayed her? "Can I talk to Olivia for a minute in private?" Clark asked. "No." Austin crossed his arms over his chest, the muscles in his biceps bulging. Clark looked at Noah and me as if we'd ever relent. Both of us echoed Austin. Clark's nostrils flared and he sighed. "Fine." He took one step into the kitchen, and Austin started to close the gap like a bodyguard. Clark stopped in his tracks. "Olivia, I'm sorry. That woman meant nothing to me at all." I held back a bitter laugh. Really? Was he really using that line? It didn't matter whether the woman meant anything to him. What mattered was that he had shown Olivia that she didn't matter, that he felt like he could go behind her back and do something as awful as he had. I opened my mouth to say this, but
Sample complete. Ready to continue?